In an ongoing legal battle between Apple, the FTC, and the Department of Justice, Apple has decided that bringing in emulators onto the App Store, to which for many Apple users like myself, this is definitely very interesting news all around. And for people who say, why not just use Android? Hey, I like my ecosystem. But regardless, we have an emulator that claims to be an all-in-one solution with multiple emulators of the Nintendo kind, all available on this app and available to go on and play. And of course, when it comes down to downloading ROMs, ask your parents. And I decided to download this emulator to see how Dragon Quest games will run on this emulator. Alongside that, I also tested out some other games as well, seeing how there's an N64 emulator on there. And of course, there's no mainline Dragon Quest games or Dragon Quest games in general on the N64. Well, there's Mischief Makers. That's published by Enix. No, it doesn't count? Thought so. But regardless, we're going to be breaking this video up into two portions, one of them talking about the Dragon Quest games and how they control on the emulator, seeing how we're dealing with touchscreen controls, and another one taking a look at the other games that I messed around with on the emulator. So with all that said, before we dive right in, I want to say thank you guys for checking out today's video, but it would be even greater if you go out and subscribe. Each and every day we get closer and closer to that 1,000 subscriber mark, so I really do appreciate it if you subscribe. So yes, let's first talk about the Dragon Quest games. As I took a look at a wide variety of them, like Dragon Warrior 4 on NES, Dragon Quest 3 on SNES, the Dragon Quest Monster games on Game Boy, and the Dragon Quest 6 remake, Dragon Quest 9, and Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 2 on DS. And one thing to add about DS games, if you plan to play DS games on Delta, make sure you have the BIOSes ready to go, seeing how Delta uses Melon DS as its basis for DS emulation. And again, where can you find those BIOSes? Ask your parents. But regardless, overall, I found the emulations to be quite fine when it comes down to playing these games. But when it comes down to controls, I didn't really have much of an issue controlling these games with the touchscreen. I think the one thing I realized when it comes down to the Dragon Quest games is that these are RPGs that don't really need precise movements. And even when there's locations where it's all controller based or it's all about particular movements of your characters, those sections let you take your time going through those areas, so you don't really need to fret about, oh, do I have the right movements here and there? No, don't worry about that when it comes down to playing the Dragon Quest games on mobile. And now specifically talking about the DS games, Dragon Quest 6 on this emulator kind of controls similar to how Dragon Quest 6 did on the mobile version. Sure, some button placements are different here and there, but it mostly played the same. And when taking a look at Dragon Quest 9, seeing how that game had touchscreen controls in the first place, yeah, you don't really need to worry too much. It actually controls just fine with just the touchscreen, with all the multiple methods you can do when playing Dragon Quest 9. The other one I felt was a little bit weird to control was Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 2, as that game is more of a 3D game, and I felt it was a bit awkward when controlling the character in the 3D playing field was the touchscreen. And of course, in any instance, if you really do feel you need a controller, you can always hook one up, and there you go, you're playing games with a controller. And my recommendation would be the SNES Switch Online controller. It's light, it has all the buttons you need for 2D games, and it's relatively portable to take on the go. But yeah, overall, when it comes down to controlling these games with the touchscreen, they felt just fine. But let's move on to the other games that I tested on this emulator. I tried out some other NES games like this Mega Man ROM hack here, Super Mario Land 1 and 2, the Fire Emblem games, and Sonic Rush. And I have to say, most of these games controlled pretty fine with just the touchscreen. Sure, Sonic Rush felt a little bit awkward to me. Hell, any games that required the run button felt a bit awkward to me, because one thing I definitely noticed when playing through something like Super Mario Land is the fact that it can't really read two inputs with one finger. And in one instance, I decided to use two fingers to make sure I was running while at the same time jumping. It felt a bit awkward for me. So in this instance here, I would recommend getting a controller if the game does require a run button. So yeah, in some cases you probably will need a controller to play through some of these games, while other games, they seem pretty fine with the touchscreen. But what's definitely the case of having a controller no questions asked is N64 emulation. Dear God, I do not wish playing Super Mario 64 on a touchscreen to my worst enemies, because playing this is pure cancer. Hell, I can't even do simple like climbing on top of Whomp's Fortress or doing the bonus slide level. I slip and fall when playing through the touchscreen. So yeah, do me a favor, get a controller when playing N64 games. And if you have it, get the N64 Switch Online controller, because most N64 games play best on an N64 controller. Though unfortunately, I do wish control issues were the only problem this emulator has, because there are indeed other problems with this emulator here. The first thing I noticed was playing Smash Remix, I noticed some text missing, Mario's overalls weren't loading properly. And at first I thought, okay, I'm playing a ROM hack here, Maybe that's an issue with the ROM hack, who knows? But then I loaded up Diddy Kong Racing and noticed the same issues. Text was not loading in properly at all, though thankfully most of the textures were loading in just fine. And then I of course took a look at Donkey Kong 64, a game that's very notorious to run accurately on emulation, and lo and behold, there was shading issues. So yeah, indeed this emulator is a bit underbaked. I'm pretty sure a majority of games will run on this emulator because if it runs Donkey Kong 64, then it probably will run anything. But I do hope, seeing how this person plans to add in more emulators down the line, that the N64 emulator gets fine-tuned as well. Because it'll be a shame if that emulator didn't get any touch-ups at all. And I get it, N64 is a system that's notorious when it comes down to emulation. Hell, Nintendo can't even get it right. But like I said, seeing how this emulator does plan to get future updates down the line, they do fine-tune that N64 emulator. And that was my experience with the Delta emulator. I have to say, for the most part, most of these emulators played fine. And most games played fine with the touchscreen, other than the platforming games that have a run button. And even though the N64 emulator does have some issues here and there, most of the games tend to run fine. But anyways, if you're an Apple user, have you tried out Delta? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you like this video, make sure you leave this video a like and subscribe as well. And you want to see more videos, definitely do check out these videos here. I personally think you'll enjoy them. See you guys on the next one. Take care.